Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our conversation today. I'm Ben Haddad. I'm the director of the Future Europe Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. This is an event in partnership with the Global Business and Economics Program coming at a very timely moment. I'd like to welcome here Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, who is the Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, the major gathering of British businesses with close to 200,000 businesses as members, coming here in we say challenging and exciting times. A few days after Brexit is effective, obviously at the beginning of a transition period where critical trade agreements will have to be negotiated with the European Union on one side, the United States on the other. You're here today for the meeting of the B7, gathering the business and industry confederations of the key members of the G7. And we're really pleased to be able to have this conversation with someone who has such a distinguished background as yourself, from government with Prime Minister John Major, with Prime Minister Major, to a career in journalism at The Economist, as well as a distinguished business background, most notably at McKinsey and different companies. We'll have you introduce and say a few words about what brings you here and what you see as the situation for the UK post-Brexit and its trade partners, and then open with follow with a conversation with our friend Penny Nass, the Vice President and Managing Director for International Public Affairs at UPS, and obviously open it to the room for a conversation. This is really an important topic for us here at the Future Europe Initiative, as we have put the future of Europe and the transatlantic relationship at the center of our work. A lot of us obviously regret the decision of Brexit, but we're really looking forward to shaping the environment and keep the United States, European Union, and the UK as close as possible, especially in this area of growing power competition that we're facing. So please, Dame Carolyn, join me, and let's open it for your remarks.
Very much indeed. Oh, well, thank you so much, Ben. And it is really wonderful to be here at the Atlantic Council, a highlight of an amazing few days. And as you say, important times, but important times here as well. And I observe the fact that we don't have the Iowa caucus to deal with back at home, but we also have some pretty lively politics. And our House of Commons debates have been broadcast globally as well. And I think it's one of the many things we share in common. It's this raucous democracy that we have. It can be messy, but it is democracy in action. And I think it does remind me of how many things we share. And this is an important time for us to be out in the world, and particularly with incredibly valued partners like you in the US. Interestingly, big weeks in many ways, but this is actually also the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower voyage, when over 100 men, women and children left the UK for the New World. And I think that says something just about our extraordinary histories. And since then, of course, our relationship has grown deeper over the years. We did have a minor break in the 1700s, when our desire for tea and taxes sparked your fight for independence. And I think one of the things that we can safely promise is that King George is no longer on our negotiating team. So some things to be cheerful about. And it is actually about trade between our two countries that I would like to talk about today, and how we can use our really deep history and really deep ties and our shared democracy, however loud and noisy it is, to take a fresh approach to modern international trade. And I think what we could achieve together is how we can get this whole idea of the benefits of global trade moving forwards again, when they can, in recent years, have felt as though they have been going backwards. And I do so, as Ben said, I do so from the perspective of British business, but not just British business, of many international firms who operate in the UK, many US firms, and we are very proud to call them our members. We do speak for nearly 200,000 firms, all sectors, all sizes. They employ a third of the private sector workforce. We are a big voice. We are a big voice into government, and we are very much a global voice. And if I had to describe how our members are feeling about global trade right now, I would say that they are excited, but they are also concerned. We are all so aware of the forces shaping our world at the moment, and actually the Atlantic Council has done some extraordinary work, I think, bringing this to life on the world stage. But we see the growing protectionist instincts. We know about rising populism in the West. Yes, we know about an introspective Europe. We have been part of that. And also a United States that is questioning the value of multilateralism in some areas. But there are many other things that we care about. We know we stand at the foothills of a quite extraordinary tech revolution. In the UK and globally now, a full 80% of tech startups are born global. Right from day one, they're exporters and they are thinking international. And of course, as we've seen with Australia's recent shocking wildfires on our television screens, the climate crisis is growing. And so while the past is there to learn from, and we must learn from it, the future, I believe, is ours to shape, and perhaps more in trade than in anywhere else. Now, of course, the UK has had its own recent challenges. I suspect some of you have followed our Brexit debate over these past painful years, and you may have wondered where the UK went for a while. Well, one of the things I can say with real confidence and a spring in my step is that we start this new decade with a new government, and their message to the world, and mine to you today, is this: that we are ready to get back to business. We never really went away, but some of the headlines may have made you think otherwise. So last Friday at 11 p.m, it was a big moment. We left the European Union after nearly 5 decades of membership. It's been an incredibly difficult process. I bear the scars. It has caused rifts in families, communities, my own family, and inevitably in politics. And it has been really tough for business. The uncertainty in the business environment has been like nothing else I have seen in my business career. But now the decision has been taken. We can move on. And although we know there are difficult conversations still to be had, it is a great relief. And one of the main areas for action will be trade. Now, as a country, we believe profoundly in free trade. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA, and it's woven into the fabric of our history. So go back in time, the merchants of England selling cloth across the world as far back as the 1200s. We also remain one of the very best places in the world to do business, ranked in the top 10 always for ease of doing business by the World Bank, and second only to the US in the G7 economies. We have 4 of the top 10 in the world, something we are profoundly proud of. We are a global leader, if not the global leader, in fintech, known for our innovation and creativity. I spent a lot of my career in the creative industries in the UK, and BBC and ITV is one of our great strengths. And we have more $1 billion plus unicorns than any other European country. So one of my messages here today, and these last few days in Washington and with the B7, is one of confidence and a real sense of can-do. From Glasgow to Portsmouth, from Belfast to London, and Liverpool to Hull, we are looking outwards for our future success. And I would say as part of that, no one is thinking about trade quite like the UK is. After years being seen as the old guard, we are now the new radicals. And so who better to break ground on trade than we, the new radicals, and the US, you, the world's largest economy, with whom we share so much. Of course, we both have challenges. It's been ever thus. For the UK, we need to forge a new relationship with the European Union, who are still our largest trading partner, or the US strategic competition with China being such a defining force. But we're also building on the largest trade and investment relationship that exists anywhere on the planet. And here in the US, British investment supports over 1 million jobs across every sector and all 50 states. And at the same time, your investment in our economy provides close to 1.5 million jobs. It's an astounding achievement. And businesses on both sides of the Atlantic recognize the significant will and ambition to negotiate a new free trade agreement between our two governments. And this, from the point of view of the CBI and British business, is very good news. We are fans. Thousands of British firms see great opportunities to extend our trading relationship. But what I would say, as we all know, in trade deals, substance really does matter. So our request of both negotiating teams will be this. This is a chance for the UK and the US to show the world how to secure an agreement fit for the future. So let's set the bar high. Let's use these discussions to set global standards. The opportunities are immense. E-commerce, one of the UK's great strengths and yours as well. Artificial intelligence, fintech, for example, the regulation of autonomous vehicles. Just to take one example for a moment, this example of AI, artificial intelligence, it's traditionally not been covered by global trade agreements. We know that. We have an opportunity to change that. We could build on the landmark agreement on AI principles reached at the OECD earlier this year and set new standards on how AI can support innovation, how it can support trust, human rights, and democratic values in both our countries. And we would also argue very strongly for putting business at the heart of the policy-making process, bringing our most forward-thinking companies on both sides of the Atlantic together in a new dialogue to advise policymakers on future regulation, particularly in these areas that can do so much good to the prosperity of our countries. Now, of course, however great our ambition, and it is great, it's important to remember that trade deals don't happen in isolation. Not only is the UK starting to negotiate trade deals in its own right for the first time in a generation, we're also intending to negotiate these deals in parallel at the same time, beginning with the EU and the United States, known as two of the most formidable negotiating partners in the world. Yes, we know. But we have thought and we have planned for this. And at the CBI, we understand how important the European market is to our members, as well as to the many US investors who do value seamless trade in EU markets. So we will be working equally hard to get the best trade deal with our European partners. But this should not be seen as an either-or choice. We can do a deal with the EU and a deal with the US if we approach them in the right way, with collaboration and vision. They can and must be complementary. And I can see a future where the UK can play a vital role as a leader and a bridge between the world's two largest trading blocs. And I do believe that we today have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to secure a global trade deal that not only drives growth, but also wrestles with the realities of the modern global economy that is changing so fast. At the CBI, we are a consultative organisation. We talk to our members all the time, and we've been talking to them about a US trade deal for a number of months now. And we have heard from them what they really care about in this deal and the opportunities they see. First, in services, the opportunities to expand services trade across the Atlantic, particularly through easing skilled migration. Secondly, small and medium-sized enterprises who don't trade enough, and I think that is true on both sides of the Atlantic. Here, practicalities really matter. How can we simplify customs procedures to make exporting far easier for firms on both sides? And thirdly, I think very interestingly, state-level engagement, that many sectors stand to benefit from a closer relationship with individual states and the other way around as well. Procurement, recognition of professional qualifications, just a couple of examples. And in the coming months, the CBI, we with our members, as the voice of British business, will be working with our government to drive progress in all of these three areas. But if I may, I'd like to end by talking about an issue I feel too often is too absent from the international and traditional trade debate, and that is the issue of public trust. If you look around the world, and I think we hear it and we see it every day, people have lost faith in trade. They're not convinced it delivers the great jobs, the lower prices, and better lives that politicians promise, or that even we as business believe in. There's real power in that scepticism. It stalls and has stalled countless past negotiations. And I believe we will only win back the trust of communities whose trust we absolutely need if we have the courage to be honest that in a globalized economy, free trade and open markets will sometimes affect jobs. And then we need the confidence to argue that the right response to this is not to close the door to foreign competition, but to invest at home, particularly in the skills people need for the changing world of work, so that more people can succeed and share in rising prosperity. This is a challenge we share, and I believe it is a challenge we can tackle together. I'd like to end actually with an example of where trade has just made a difference to one community that I know well back in the UK. If you take the Welsh founders of Penderyn Whisky, they were inspired by two pioneering US distillers with their own links to Wales. That was Jack Daniels and Evan Williams. And they were named after the small village where their distillery is based in Wales. They've grown to become a world-leading whisky brand, exporting to the US, China, and elsewhere. And today, Penderyn supports hundreds of jobs in a region that was once dominated by heavy industry, exactly the kind of region that we need to make sure is developing the jobs of the future. And I think it's just one example. There are so many of the powerful community impact that global trade can have. And we as a business community, and all of us involved in trade, we need to tell these stories. We need to make them feel local, we need to make them feel real, and above all, we need to make them feel human. So the good thing as I finish and we get on to a chat, I do think the answers lie in our hands. I'm an optimist, and at the CBI, we're optimists for global trade, and we believe that business has a really profound role to play. As providers of evidence, yes, we can do that. As vocal champions for trade, yes, of course, we can do that. But most important of all, in seizing the benefits of trade to transform lives. Now, we know there will be some very hard trade-offs ahead. I've deliberately not mentioned some of them. I've not mentioned food or healthcare. There'll be plenty of time for that, and we may even get to them in questions in a few moments. But let's start with a sense of ambition of what the UK and the US can achieve together. We, the new radicals on the block, you, the largest economy in the world with whom we already share so much. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.
So, thank you very much. I think that was a very upbeat start to after lunch to keep everybody in the room energized and excited and optimistic about the future of the UK and the EU. I wanted to ask you a little bit. I think there was so much to unpack in what you said, and I've been such a fan of yours through the Brexit last 3 years, because you at oftentimes have had to kind of speak truth to power with regards to what this all meant for business in the UK. And I think that optimism after kind of 3 years of being held back a little bit is now coming out. Beforehand, I told you we've been, just last week, made a big investment in the UK.
I'm so pleased to hear that. Fantastic.
And it was in an innovative electric vehicle company that's going to make electric vehicles for us for around the world. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, as we move forward with thinking about this new global trade agenda, how do you marry the innovative aspects of what the UK stands for with some of what you have as maybe your more traditional bits, and how that all plays together as you move forward?
Well, Penny, thank you, and thanks for your observations about the last 3 years. I mean, it has been an incredibly important time for business to have a voice about what matters, and we've been, I think, proud at the CBI to have been able to speak with an evidence base, always with an evidence base about what matters. And if I look back, actually, it's just as important what didn't happen as what did happen. You know, we did not have a no deal outcome, which I think was universally agreed to be a bad outcome for our economy. We are now in a transition period as we speak. That was something that the business voice called for and secured. But I do think at the same time, one of the unfortunate side effects of the debate is it has distracted attention from some of the things that the UK is really good at. And I do think, Penny, it's so interesting to hear you talk about your investment. I think what the UK can do is marry old and new, actually particularly well. I look at the fact that we have some of the oldest and most successful universities in the world who are now collaborating incredibly well with business. It's one of the things that we've been trying to foster in the CBI. We have most of the UK's university base as members of ours. And I think it is one of our messages to the world that if you want to think about great R&D, if you want to think about the technology of future sustainable energy, come and look at the UK, because we are good at this. And I know there's still uncertainty around the EU relationship. You might ask a bit more about that. I'm delighted to comment on it. But we will find a way through. And that kind of core innovation that we have, that we can bring into trade deals, I think that's where our optimism is coming from. And now we just need to make it practical.
Yeah, no, so I think we feel that sense of innovation and optimism and spirit now in the UK, in terms of some of the companies we're working with, either as suppliers or as partners or otherwise. There's always been that spirit there, which is one reason why we're very excited about the US-UK free trade agreement. We at UPS in particular believe that there's a lot that we could be doing together to make this really a gold-plated,
completely agree,
free trade agreement between the US and the UK. And I wondered if maybe we could touch on a couple of areas where there may be opportunities to go above and beyond and really set the global standard for free trade agreements. And I wondered if you had some thoughts on that.
So I completely agree, and because I think one of the things that sometimes the language of trade is not helpful. It's very sort of up in the up in the sky, and actually I think that what businesses hugely value global standards. They hugely value the ability to have total kind of clarity of standard and regulation in the markets they operate in. And what's happening now, of course, is our economies are changing radically. They are responding to the opportunities of AI, of autonomous vehicles, of how we're going to use big data in ways that are for good and not for ill. And we're grappling with how we turn this massive revolution that we have into higher productivity, higher living standards and higher growth for all our countries. That's the end goal. And if we have that as our objective, then why shouldn't the US and the UK seek to achieve a global standard in artificial intelligence, for example, including some of the difficult challenges around data privacy and online harm. I think we have to be really, really honest about the trust issues that we have on both sides of the Atlantic. But if we could aim for that, and I mean, the other thing I would like to say is that the fact that we are negotiating with the European Union at the same time, let's see that as an opportunity. So many people are saying, well, how can you do it? You know, it's so difficult. Well, why not see this as an opportunity to try and do something that is genuinely global, or that genuinely brings together, at the very least, Europe with the US, with the UK, in putting something together that really sets the bar high. Because this is a period of enormous change. And the more that we can collaborate and make cross-border business easy in these new areas, I think the more our individual countries will benefit. So I'd pick AI. I'd say fintech is another area because we have such strength. The UK is the fintech capital of the world. And autonomous vehicles, it's very interesting. That's the investment you're making. We know this is coming. We know it's going to be huge. The UK has traditional great strengths in the car industry. It is changing. We are looking to where our new place in that global value chain is going to be. But we can bring that very, very strong engineering and science strength that we have to that. And let's try and forge global standards in those areas.
I couldn't agree more.
Does that sound okay?
The one question to dig into that a little bit further, it seems to me also that the US and the UK is kind of the global stalwarts on democracy. There's an opportunity with some of the big issues that are out there at the moment with state-sponsored capitalism, with things around state-owned enterprises, industrial subsidies, things that are going, but maybe in the past have been held back a little bit in US-EU conversations because there may be some parties in Europe that also themselves have quite a large state-owned enterprise sector. So query if you see the issues that, kind of dancing around the China issues if there's opportunities to look at those issues as well as part of a US-UK deal.
Well, I really think there is, and it's been so interesting to me being in Washington these last few days and having talked about China a lot. And one of the things that's really struck me is how much our businesses share the concerns. I think there is, there's no doubt that China's changed. And we are collectively, I think, having experiences in China which are challenging around IP, around human rights, around market access. So these are all absolutely shared issues. And I think it has now become much more one of recognizing that the direction of travel for China is not one that is going to be market oriented, and how we confront that together. That said, the other thing I think we know from business is that these are also extremely fast-growing markets, and and potential opportunities that our businesses have. UK businesses, for example, have been very active in Belt and Road. Our accountancy, our engineering, our sort of gold standard corporate governance, all very, very welcomed into Belt and Road initiatives. So we are, I think, all in the business of kind of working out a new response to the new China that we now see. And yes, I think the fact that the UK now has its own independent voice at the WTO, for example, I mean, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting feeling. The UK will now take up its independent seat around the WTO table. We are great believers in multilateralism and how we can try and help to create, if you like, an alliance across economies that are believers in markets, and how we do create standards that enable us to be highly competitive. I think it all comes together. I think this is a real opportunity, and again, I think the UK can perhaps play quite an unusual role here because of the different and actually good relationships we have with all sides, actually including with China.
You talked a little bit about the trust during your remarks and the public trust. So yesterday there was an event here in town where they were looking at some of the polling data around swing voters in certain states, and there's this project here looking at that. And they had interviewed them at length about trade. And what we discovered, or what they were presenting to us, was how linked trade and actually immigration are in terms of the public's mind with regards to jobs. Now that's the US story to a little bit. I think we still needs a little more unpacking with it. Immigration's been such a huge issue in the UK. Yeah. How do you see that playing out, particularly given the importance of the service sector for the UK?
Well, trade in services in many ways is people moving. I mean, we are now an 80% services economy. 40% of our exports are services. And when I talk to our services members, the ability for people to be able to get on a plane, to be able to go to visit a client, to be able to deliver a project, absolutely fundamental. But you're absolutely right. Immigration was the central issue in our referendum vote 3.5 years ago. I remember actually very early on in the campaign, I went to Wales, and I was visiting Wales, and Wales in the end very strongly voted to leave the European Union. And I was talking to people there about why, and immigration came up again and again and again, even though Wales has the lowest immigration of any part of the UK. And actually, what I realised from that, so much of this was actually to do with fear, rather than actually the reality of the jobs of the jobs market. And I think it was a real wake-up call for the UK in terms of how the perception of immigration was so closely tied up with identity, as well as with jobs. Now, what's interesting actually is that over the last 3 years, concern around immigration has fallen. It is a much lower concern for people than it was. And we will be hoping to see an approach in the UK that is, yes, more controlled. I mean, we will not have freedom of movement. That is something that will lapse, and we know that. But there's something that is, anybody who visits London can see that. It is a place people want to go, they want to work. We have young people who as entrepreneurs come from countries all over the world to set up their business in the UK, and we do not want that to stop. We also have skill shortages in many parts of our industry, as I believe is also true in the US and Canada. And how we make that case for skill levels skill levels in all parts of the economy. So it remains a very, very live issue. We know that this has not normally been part of a trade deal with the US. I think it's something that we should think about and see whether it can be on the table.
Great. So I'm going to give you all a 2-question warning. I'm going to ask 2 more questions, then I'm going to look to you in the audience to see if you have any questions. So think and formulate if you can. So if I could, another possible item between US, UK. You all are hosting COP26.
Yes.
I think the week after our presidential election.
Indeed.
So how do you see, is that an area of opportunity, an area of challenge? How do you as the UK business community see the environmental issues in this?
Well, we are hugely excited to be hosting COP at the end of this year, and the business community is very much on board with the agenda around net zero, getting to net zero emissions. And actually, it's an area I think that we are seeking to lead on. Earlier this year, as a CBI, last year now, we wrote to the then Prime Minister Theresa May, urging legislation for a 2050 net zero target, which is now in place. And the way we see it is this could be an opportunity to innovate, bringing together the best of government and the best of business around solutions to deliver the climate action that we all need. We've had significant investment, a lot of it international, some of it local, working in partnership in offshore wind. And miraculously, it is now below €40 per kilowatt hour. No one thought that was possible. It shows what good regulation and private sector working hand in hand can achieve. So we want this to be a positive COP. I mean, one of the things that we think has happened is that everything has become about gloom and despair. And actually, if you look over the sweep of time, politics may not have delivered everything we needed, but technology has over-delivered time and time again. And what we would like to create in our COP is a sense of the ability to solve this problem if we work together. And we want a roadmap, and we want it to be encompassing heat and transport and housing. And we are hoping that we will have a very positive engagement from the US. We are hoping we will have China around the table. We understand that none of this will be easy, but we also believe that the contribution that business can make in terms of innovation should make this a COP that's about hope and not about despair.
Well, that's great to hear, because at my house we read British newspapers every morning, principally because I have a husband and children that follow Arsenal, and which are a little like the Washington Redskins at the moment, I think, in terms of soccer scores. But and so the only thing I can say is, as we read this, sometimes the thing that always also pops up in the UK papers is that the weather seems to be getting a little weird.
Well, your weather so is yours, though. I arrived here
weird
on
everywhere.
Monday, and it was spring.
Yes.
I mean, it was extraordinary. I honestly think that in the UK, as in many other countries around the world, people have just woken up to this being a genuine emergency. And we do use the language of climate emergency in the UK. We have to act. It's just that we do it from a place of optimism. We do it from a place of solubility. And actually, we're trying to showcase examples of where there has been real progress, like offshore wind. And there are other challenges we have. How do we eradicate? We all heat our houses in the UK with gas boilers. We're going to need to switch out 26 million gas boilers. Mm-hmm. Well, business can do that in partnership. I think so. We've got the felt need now. I think our young people, our kids are out on a Friday from school in Westminster like kids around the world. And I think the young people in our businesses are challenging us on this. We've had Extinction Rebellion very much in boardrooms around the table talking about how we do this. One of the other things I think that we will be trying to profile at our COP is measurement and metrics. The idea of getting to science-based metrics that everyone can sign up to. That will help hugely. Again, can do, how we do that. The IBC at Davos, I think, made some quite big progress on that. So this can be, I think, a real turning point. But I think we shouldn't underestimate, though, also that it is going to be a COP where people are going to be working out whether this is for real in terms of action. And we want to demonstrate that it really is for real, that action can be taken that works.
So my final question, then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. We talked beforehand, so moving into the kind of what I would call the 5-dimensional chess of the US-UK negotiations. So we're the world's largest customs broker, and we're trying to figure out how goods are going to cross borders when you've got EU-UK, US-UK, the Irish border, and changing domestic regulations all going on at the same time.
Yeah.
Opportunities, but lots of moving pieces. And how we advise our small and medium-sized customers on what they need to do, what's coming, is a challenge.
You are just, you are right in the front line, aren't you, at UPS? Can I say, I think it's fantastic the work you've been doing with SMEs, with small and medium-sized businesses, because this has been utterly, overwhelmingly confusing for them. We're quite struck that our bigger businesses have been, I think, able to kind of manage the uncertainty, whereas smaller businesses have kind of, I think it's become just too complicated. So thank you hugely for that. The 5-dimensional chess analogy is absolutely right. The uncertainty is the thing that we absolutely have to resolve this year. And so one of the things that we're doing as a CBI is just talking to government about the practicalities. Again, it's this point about language. Don't talk about friction at borders. Talk about actually the 12-page form that needs to be filled in, or what happens if you have a 3-hour delay in a just-in-time, automotive supply chain, and how where will the trucks go if there are a delay? Where is the actual parking space? What are the forms you need to have completed if you are an SME? Let's get really practical, and I do that. If I just sort of speak to the optimistic again for a moment, because we are coming at this, if you like, almost new. This is a new government with a new commitment. We're coming out. We've also been doing quite a lot of amassing of trade expertise over the last, couple of years. I think we can do this. And the big message that we've got to our government is get business around the table every step of the way. Actually, the US is very good at this. We're using the US as an example to make sure there's practical issues that you're facing, that your SME clients are facing. We just tick them off. We tick them off almost in a practical checklist rather than being up in the clouds in terms of theory.
Well, great. Well, with that, I'm going to see if there's anyone in the audience. I can keep asking questions, but look at all those hands come up. So I see 3 over there, and then I'll go to the ones over there. So I see 1, 2, 3, and then we'll start with those 3. I'll come back to you, sir, in the front. So. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Hannah Monican, Inside U.S. Trade. I just wanted to follow up on something you said about how the UK and the EU and the U.S. can sort of have the UK complementary deals with the U.S. and the EU. But it does seem like at the end of the day, the UK is going to have to decide a little bit whether or not to diverge from EU rules and to what extent. And so I'm curious, number one, what you kind of are expecting from the UK government on how much they might diverge from the EU rules and playbook, and where the business community wants to see that go, and how you want the business community to move forward depending on how that plays out.
Would you like us to collect a couple questions, or would you like to ask them one at a time?
If someone can give me a pen and paper, I wouldn't mind collecting two or three as a go. That would be great.
I've got paper right there in the front.
Ben,
I can
if you
lend
can just
my
scribble.
pencil.
Brilliant. My memory will fail me otherwise. Oh, that is great.
Thank you.
So yeah, the divergence, absolutely.
Okay, and then there was one in the back. And then I'll come back to the gentleman up here in the front. So all the way in the back.
Henry Hatker, retired government. I heard maybe a year ago that the large automobile plant run by Nissan in Scotland would be faced with a possible closure if the Brexit occurred. And they were subject to an EU tariff to export those vehicles into the EU. It would be hopeless and economically, and they would then decide to close it. I wondered, has anything been worked out on this? Some of the vehicles, of course, would probably stay within the UK, and there wouldn't be any problem with that. But what is the latest?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then we have a gentleman with the green tie up front here. Right there.
Hi, thank you. Dave Nelson with Cargill.
Hi, Dave.
I understand that Boris Johnson the other day gave a speech suggesting that the UK could move toward science-based regulations for food imports. How realistic is that, given both domestic popular opinion as well as the EU relationship, and how would that work? And if I could just ask you to comment on a second issue. You talked about COP. What does the CBI think about how feasible and desirable it would be to incorporate climate goals into trade agreements?
So we'll start with those, and then we'll take that side of the room next.
Yeah.
And I see you there, sir, gentlemen. I'll get you the next time around.
Great. Surely the UK is going to have to choose, and where are we going on divergence? Trade is all about choices, and all I would say is I think this kind of I do worry about the simplicity of describing this as a US-EU choice. I don't think that's where the UK feels it is. I think we feel that we are now establishing our own new global trade policy, and we are actually looking at markets all across the world, and we will be having to make hard choices. I think what you will have heard from our government so far is that we have the right to diverge now from the European Union, but we don't have an obligation to. And one of the things that we'll be looking to do over the next few months is to inform the decisions on the basis of UK economic interest, because that's what trade is all about, in terms of where divergence is helpful to jobs and growth and where it isn't. There are some areas where actually being close to the European Union, we've been incredibly clear that it really matters. And actually one of them, running into the question about Nissan, is in automotive. We have integrated supply chains that crisscross the border, many, many times before a car eventually rolls off the assembly line. The idea that the UK would choose to align to a completely different set of automotive standards would not be in our national interest. So there are some areas which are absolutely crystal clear. But as I was saying earlier to Penny, I think there are other areas where the new world of different technology options is opening up, and AI is an example, where actually what we'd love to do is to see whether we can create global standards. Is that divergence or alignment? It's kind of neither. And I think one of the things we need to be very careful not to do in the next phase of trade negotiations is to get stuck on language again. We got really stuck on language, I think, in Brexit in terms of deal, no deal, red lines, all of that. Let's think bigger than that. There will be choices, but we're going to be making them, I think, in a very evidence-based and transparent way.
So it's no longer deal, no deal. It's Canada or Australia.
That's it. Well, that's the new. No, exactly. So just to pick up just a bit more on the Nissan question. It's been a real concern in the UK that because the car industry actually was on its last legs in the 1980s in the UK, and it has become an enormous jewel in our crown, and we are very keen not to lose it. We do think that the case has been very strongly made for zero tariff, zero quota trade, and that the automotive supply chain is actually going in both directions. So the European Union has great interest in tariff and quota-free automotive trade as well. So we are hopeful on that. Nissan, as we speak, continues to produce a car a minute off its plant in Sunderland. It's interesting to note, actually, its Sunderland plant is its most productive in the world. So there are very good reasons for Nissan to want to be in the UK in terms of labour force, skills, supply chains, and so on. And we are very keen to keep them with us. They are a fantastic member of the CBI and a fantastic contributor to our economy. For the question on science-based regulation, actually, we've had this whole conversation without mentioning chlorinated chicken. It's very so I will just say it and then I won't say it again. But I think one of the things, the trouble with the trade debate, and it gets back to this trust point, is that it can so quickly end up in headlines in our media being totally oversimplified and sensationalized. And we lived through the pain of that during TTIP. We saw a bit of it actually in our election campaign. I don't know if you saw, but our opposition party actually took the conversation in that direction around the NHS and the US trade deal. I would like to see the business community and we at the CBI do all we can to try and keep the debate rational and reasonable and non-sensationalized. There's no doubt these are going to be difficult issues. In many ways in the UK, the issues are actually less about food safety than about animal welfare. Actually, that's become a bigger issue. But I do think there's a lot that we can do to learn the lessons of the past and try and talk. That's why I talked about the stories that we can tell about the value of trade. We need to keep talking and demonstrating why actually being able to reach agreements on these things will be good for jobs and good for communities. So no guarantees, but I have to say, I think that with the right kind of messaging, the right kind of collaboration with government, hopefully we can avoid some of the mistakes of the past.
Great. So I'm going to take 3 questions from this side. So I see 1. So far, I see 1. I see 2. And then I have 1 all the way in the back. Okay?
Hi there. Lauren Meyer with Washington Times. So
Hi.
President Trump and Boris Johnson are known to have a very close relationship. Has there been any sort of discussion within your organization or with people that you've visited, either with who have either a fear or maybe hope of what would happen to the U.S.-UK relationship if the U.S. elects a Democratic president later this year?
1.
Oh, yes, sorry, right.
No,
Yep,
it's okay.
yep.
I'm just trying to be.
Good idea.
1 there and 1 in the back.
Hi, my name is Louis Rothberg. I'm a trade attorney here in Washington. One of the things you said quickly in passing, which intrigued me, was perhaps British nationals would have the right to come to the United States and practice their profession here, automatically having their credentials or their admission to do their profession recognized here by the various states of the U.S. And conversely, U.S. citizens would be able to go there and immediately practice law, open a medical practice and whatever. Is that what I thought you were saying? And if that would be a first in an international free trade agreement, I would think. And to follow on that, are you suggesting that the immigration laws be modified to give British nationals some type of preferential immigrant or non-immigrant visa status here, in addition to what the immigration laws now provide?
Thank you. And 1 in the back.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Dave Snyder, American Property Casualty Insurance Association. London and New York are the 2 great financial hubs, and I'm wondering what priorities you place on financial services going forward, not only with regard to the US-UK, but also regard to common international standards.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
All set?
Sure. We haven't spent a whole lot of time here talking about future politics. I think we're very focused on today. I would say, though, that I think as a business community, we would be delighted to work with whoever is in the White House here. I think one of the really powerful things about business communities is that we're not round the political table and we're not round the negotiating table. We can talk about what builds prosperity and jobs in each other's countries. And actually, I think one of the most powerful things that I'm proud of the CBI's contribution to is work we do every year on the job creation in each other's countries. And it is staggering. We are the biggest single foreign direct investor in each other's countries with investment of over $1 trillion. And whoever is in the White House, I think we would be making that point that we have so much to gain from strengthening this relationship, and it comes back to jobs and livelihoods and communities. So we will work with whoever, and those will be our messages. On recognition of professional qualifications, it is interesting. I think we're all becoming services economies. I think the US probably has a pretty not quite as service oriented as the UK, but the ability of people to move is a genuine driver of prosperity. And it is quite interesting, I think that there is something like this between the US and Canada, in that if you have a Canadian qualification, it is pretty well recognized in the US. And I think exploring opportunities for really skilled people in engineering, in tech, in law, in medicine, to move freely, particularly in a world where we're all trying to invent the next cure for cancer. We're all trying to invent the next step forward in AI. And we started the conversation, Penny, talking about innovation. Innovation happens best when you have teams of all the talents around the table. And that means that people have to be able to move. So I don't know the exact mechanism. I don't think I'm going to prescribe it. But I think as a business community, we can talk about the outcomes that we want, which is, great people able to work together across borders to do their job. And, if that can be part of the conversation we have, I think that'd be very powerful. And I wouldn't really want to prescribe immigration law change here. I don't think that's our job. But I would simply go back to this point about the power of people being able to move in the modern economy and how we all benefit from that. I wouldn't go as far as to recommending any US administration on immigration laws. That's a matter for you. On financial services, hugely important to both our economies, and actually one of the things I've been very, very encouraged by here is to see how actually open the trade already is in our financial services sector. It's an achievement over many years. It's not going to be contentious, I don't think, in a US-UK deal. It's a question of how we can build on it. Actually, we had a very interesting conversation back to kind of global problem solving. On both sides of the Atlantic, we have a protection gap. People are underinsured. In general, in the Western world. Could we put something into our trade deal about jointly addressing the protection gap? That's the kind of, aim high ambition that I think it would be great to see if we can have. I will maybe use this as an opportunity, though, to say that we are pretty confident that the UK will remain a really, really powerful financial centre. There's been some talk through Brexit that will be damaged. I think we are now very confident that the UK will remain strong. And actually, the opportunity is exactly in global standards now. The message that we have from our members is actually what they really want to see is global standards. And again, if we can make that the centrepiece, rather than some of the areas that might divide us and be more challenging, we can make real progress, I think, in this deal.
Can I go back to something you just said a minute ago?
Sure.
Because you talked about, can we talk a little bit about trust in business?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there's a trust deficit in general in the world at the moment. Whether it's government, whether it's media, whether it's business, we seem to trust strangers' reviews on the internet more than we trust people who used to be the experts, quote unquote. What are you doing at CBI, or how are you thinking about this trust deficit in terms of maybe some of the anti-corporate, anti-business sentiment that's out there? And maybe it's less severe in the UK than it is in the US, but I was just query about that.
It is probably our top issue, is the relationship between citizens and business. I would say actually there is some pretty encouraging news recently in terms of what people feel about business. I don't know if many of you see the Edelman Trust Survey that's published annually. It was published in Davos this year. Actually, trust in business is rising and is well ahead of trust in media and government. And actually, if you dig beneath the surface, actually the strongest relationship of all is the relationship between business and employee. It's a really powerful one, and actually it's not just rising, it's high. People trust the business they work for. And I sometimes think as a business community, we haven't been proud enough of that, and we haven't, in a sense, made the most of that channel of communication and engagement. So we are doing a huge amount in the CBI on this. There are a number of things. Businesses being purpose-led and not just saying they are, but doing it. We have the majority of our members already have a purpose. I think 75% are clear about their purpose. Few of them have a plan for how they're going to demonstrate it. And we are working this year with Oxford Side Business School and McKinsey to develop really practical action around how you demonstrate purpose through sustainability, diversity and inclusion, impact on your community. These are the things people really care about. We are also, I think, keen on there being metrics that are used by investors, and I think the sustainability, the ESG metrics are going to be a big part of that. But I think finally this point about the relationship with employees, how we engage and bring them with us on journeys through climate change, through the automation challenge we have. But we should not wear a hair shirt over this too much. The relationship of trust is one I think we can be proud of and do more on, but we, I think, are potentially able to do a lot more than we have sometimes thought.
Thank you for that. So, sir, I know I missed you the first time, so I've gentleman here, and then if there's other questions, we've got a few more minutes.
Hi, Robert Shara, retired from the IMF. I thank you for your excellent talk.
Thank you.
I think that I just wanted to comment that trade deals are incredibly complicated. They're full of minute arcane details which most people have never heard of, as well as a myriad of mercantilist interests. I'm sure you're well aware of that. So your upbeat language, I think, to an extent, contrasts with the language coming out of 10 Downing Street, where they seem obsessed with the minute English fishing industry, and this must be finished by December 31st. Now in law in Britain that there's not going to be an extension, which makes it almost impossible. So I wonder if you'd comment on that, and I would only say that a lot of my friends in England that were avid Remainers were pleased that Boris Johnson became leader, because they said he seems to have no problem in completely reversing previous positions, and they meant that very positively. So I wonder if, I mean it, because he did reverse himself on several things, and we avoided a no-deal Brexit perhaps because of that, and I hope the same thing will happen with these other things. I'd like your comments.
Well, thank you. First of all, nice to see you from the IMF. My very first job was at the IMF many years ago, so pleasure to meet somebody who's from there. So listen, I mean, trade deals are enormously complicated. We have we're at the foothills now of a brand new trade strategy for the UK. And yes, there is a lot of rhetoric. I do think it's quite important not to believe the headlines at the moment. The kind of conversations that are going on beneath the surface, I think, are different. In some ways, I know that there's real concern about the not extending the deadline for transition at the end of the year. The only thing I would say on that is that if you're talking to businesses, they desperately want some certainty, and the idea of perpetually moving deadlines is not very attractive either. So what I can say to you and to friends in the UK, and I have many as well who are very sad, feeling as though this is just totally the wrong place to be. I think we have to make the most of where we are with a very positive vision for the future, which I think we can have. And the government that we have is a pro-enterprise one. We have worked with Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London. And our big message to the government is one of get business evidence around the table so that we're making these difficult trade decisions in a way that work for our economy. So it's going to be an interesting, very different year, but we as a business community are around the table.
So a question for you. Are you hearing anything different from your Scottish members or your North Irish members or your Welsh members than what you're hearing from your English members?
Do you know, not really, in that we are a very integrated UK economy. What I would say is that our Northern Ireland members were there are some specific Northern Ireland concerns. Some of the most severe of their concerns, which were about the north-south border were addressed in the withdrawal agreement, which now effectively creates a single customs zone and a single regulatory zone within the island of Ireland, even if there is now no deal. So that was something that Northern Ireland businesses lobbied for and won, and that was an important result. There is now a new problem, though, which is the border between Northern Ireland and GB. UPS, I'm sure, is watching that hawkishly. We do not have an answer on that. And to your point about detail, of course, there are so many detailed questions out there. But everybody is united in the in this ambition for making trade easy. And I think what we will be trying to do is to keep the UK voice, if you like, as united as we can on this. We do not want to see a breaking up of the United Kingdom as a market. So we will be really emphasising the fact that this is a single market in and of itself, now trying to negotiate a deal with our biggest trading partner, and that's going to be the focus.
Great. Are there other questions in the audience? One in the back.
Hi, Wendy Moore, retired State Department. That's a very optimistic vision, and I can see a lot of opportunities for international standards in general, and certainly as part of a very ambitious trade agreement. But if I can descend back into trade wonkery,
Sure.
You are preparing to engage with an administration that has expressed a clear preference for managed trade techniques for dealing with trade issues, and specifically has been very happy to negotiate deals which include commitments to buy certain products. Also, in at least one of their negotiating proposals for US-UK agreement, they were very emphatic about getting rid of unnecessary standards that, to be defined later, but that doesn't suggest a huge amount of motivation to create new international global standards in areas where we might potentially be competing. So the question is, and then there is also GMOs and hormone beef and chicken and animal welfare and all of those other things. How would you advise your government to thread this needle? You speak of an FTA, but what you might see in front of you at the end may essentially be a sectoral agreement. And as a WTO member, and clearly you yourself are committed to the principles of the WTO, what would you tell them to do?
I think that we, my short answer on that is that none of us have negotiated deals like this. So I don't think I'm going to be an expert in the trade wonkery side of things. I think that what we can most usefully do is to make sure that when our government is making decisions on any of these details, some of them very big details around specific commitments, they know the impact on our economy. And we are learning, I think, the best practice not only from the US, but also from Australia and Canada and other best in practice kind of trade architectures, to make sure that our government is able to make those decisions with their eyes wide open. I hope that we don't end up with something really narrow. That's partly my entire message here today. I think we have a big opportunity to try and do something bigger. If it is kept as narrow as that, well, as I say, this is part of a global trade strategy that the UK now has. But I think in terms of what we would advise, our main advice at the moment is absolutely make sure that you have business advice around the table, as you have in the US, in our architecture going forwards.
So I have a question for you with regards to, as a company that has twice prepared for a no-deal exit and spent millions and millions of dollars to prepare for something that didn't happen.
Yeah, it's painful.
Are you putting any odds on a no-deal Australian deal on December 31, 2020?
I have such sympathy with you and our other members who've been marched up that hill twice now, and it was painful, my goodness. We've never quite added up the amount of money that was spent on no-deal planning. Penny, I I don't know. I think that everything that we are seeing suggests that we could have some pretty touchy conversations over the next 6 months. All I think we can keep going back to is the set of principles that actually enabled us to avoid no deal last year, which is this would be shooting ourselves collectively in the foot, EU and UK, if we were to end up with something that looks like WTO. And what we know is that WTO, Australia, whatever you want to call it, is so far away from what protects our collective economies, and if we keep on going back to the shared interest, then I am hopeful that we will avoid that. What we will be doing, though, is we will be carrying on supporting our members to make the preparations that they do need, because one of the things that's going to happen quite quickly is that deadline for extending the transition will come and go in June, and then we will be into a countdown, and it will feel like tomorrow. I've tried to be optimistic today. I remain optimistic, but I think that the challenges of this year could still be there. And what we can do, though, is to keep coming back to the mutual interest, which has got us thus far very successfully. And that will be our mission for the year.
So my final question for you is, I read that you and your husband took a year off with your 3 children and traveled the world, I think. And as somebody looking at the Iowa caucuses and all of the things going on in Washington, I have fantasies of doing something very similar. And I just wonder if there's certain days in the past couple years where you just said, maybe that would be a good thing to do again.
Oh, well, you know what? We did that 15 years ago, and it was the best thing we did. If you ever want any thoughts on that, Penny, we homeschooled our kids. We took them to 50 countries. It was a fantastic year. But no, in terms of the last few years, boy, it's had its moments. I mean, that point about just carrying on, bringing the evidence and bringing it to the table. It's not always an easy place to be, but it's a really important role, and I think it's a really important role for business organizations in the US as well. We've just been here for the B7 with the chambers, and we've just met the Business Roundtable, and we're kind of all in this together. And I think that the thing that's kept me going, and really, I mean, I've really enjoyed the job. I've really enjoyed it, an important time. It is this point about the way. My diagnosis of why we are where we are actually is flat productivity growth for far too long in our economies. We have not been delivering the prosperity and the growth across different regions of our respective countries. And that is what people care most about. And the only people who can actually really make a difference to that are businesses trading well and effectively, innovating and growing. And that's what we need to keep bringing the conversation back to. It's how we take steps that build our collective prosperity. And I think we're being heard. I do think we're being heard. I can point to lots of examples in the UK now where we're getting the right infrastructure investment, the right skills investment, and trade is a big part of that. So yes, I mean, sometimes the lure of the round the world pass is very attractive, but I think that as a business community, we have such an important role right now. And with members like you, Penny, UPS and others, I think this next year we could be heading into this could be a good decade. And if we do the right things, it could be a decade where actually we turn a lot of this around and we get a real decade of prosperity.
Well, with that, I would like to thank you for taking the time to be with all of us today. And thanks for your honesty and optimism. So,
Thank you, Kelly.